Graduated, elevated, now it's my time to shine, yeah, let's go. Graduated, elevated, now it's my time to shine, yeah, let's go. Major moves, power moves.
Welcome to Ph.D. Hard Talk. I am your host, Noma Mguni, and thank you so much, Dean Mazhawidza, for being a guest on Ph.D. Hard Talk. Could you please introduce yourself, your university, and also your research, and then we can crack on, essentially.
Okay. Thank you so much, Noma, for having me here. I really appreciate. Such an honor to being interviewed by you. So my name is Dean Mazhawidza. Yes, you pronounced my surname correctly. Thank you for that. I get a lot of names being called to me. I'm from Stellenbosch University in Cape Town, South Africa, and my PhD topic is improving the level of career maturity on career choices among grade 12 learners in the Western Cape, South Africa. I'm Zimbabwean by birth, and I've been staying in South Africa for about 10 years, almost 10, a decade now. And yeah, I'm passionate about career psychology. I'm an industrial psychologist. I like to help young people. I'm passionate about youth development, and I want to see a better world. I think one of my goals as a person is to reduce the youth unemployment through career education and awareness. I think I'll end there. Yeah.
Wow, I'm loving that. So I think where I will start from is the research itself, and then we can work through your CV, essentially. So in terms of grade 12, how old are those students so that we've got understanding in terms of the audience at home?
So grade 12 is something from, I'll say 17, earliest might be 16 to 18. So that is grade 12. So in your UK syllabus, it will be an A-level student. That's a grade 12.
Okay, excellent. So we've set the scene now. Back to your research. So you've mentioned that you are quite motivated about youth employment and also their education. So when I'm looking at your abstract, I'd like to know in terms of how you identified your research gap.
I think my research streams down from my NGO, the one that I founded. I think 3 years ago when I started it, my main goal was to educate young people about career choices and what goes into making a career decision. Because you tend to see that there's high dropout rate in universities or chop and changing of degrees because there's no certain, or sorry, they are not certain or they are not quite sure this is the way that I want to go. And there are a lot of influences or external input that comes from parents, schools, teachers, the environment that makes a child to choose a certain degree. So from that, I started seeing that a lot of young people, they lack the advice from external people, which is career guidance and support people, psychologists, advisors, etc., which direct them in the direction that they want to be. So by doing our programs, which they are called Career Pathfinder program, I started realizing that a lot of kids, they don't get exposure to quite understand who they are as people or as young people and what options are out there for them. And that also leads to a high number of youth unemployment because they don't know what to look for. So from there, it started building up until I got to this stage where I started realizing, let me put it in academic writing. I'm not the first person. That's one thing you need to know, Norma, to raise this awareness. But I'm part of the people who wants to raise this awareness because it's being a lot of literature that has been written. Even in UK, they're also sitting with the problem of what do we do with graduates who are done with the university. They don't know what to do with them because then that increased that youth unemployment. I think that's where my interest came from because of seeing young people not doing anything and staying at home and they're very young and they don't have a plan.
Okay, so the research gap then, you haven't touched on that. How did you identify? I know you've said that, there are previous scholars who've looked at the same topic as you, but to identify your research gap, how did you get there?
I
In
think
terms of education, not from the NGO, but from an education perspective in terms of research?
that transition from high school to tertiary to the world of work, that's the gap. And there's no one who's touching that or educating the young people as to listen, there's life after high school, and you need to have this type of skills or this type of knowledge for you to be equipped to survive in the world of work or tertiary education or HE, which is higher education. So I think that's where the gap came from, because there are not a lot of people who touches on that. And I feel that with that gap, I have to exploit it so that at least I can prepare young people, or I can give interventions or develop interventions that can help young people to have that smooth transition to the world of work and higher education. I think, yeah, that's where I see the gap.
Okay. And in regards to your research then, I mean, you've mentioned the fact that, you know, there aren't any specific career pathways that are in place to help these children. I'll call them children for the sake of our discussion.
Let's call them
And
learners. Learners is a
learners,
better
right?
word.
Okay, we'll call them
Yes.
learners. So in terms of benefiting the community then, are you benefiting the learners or are you benefiting the parents through your research? Whom are you trying to give back to through your research in terms of education?
It's a bit of both. So I'll take I'll explain it to you. So when we do these interventions, we might have 300 kids who might be interested, right? But you find out only 5 will benefit from these interventions. So if I make an impact on one learner, which is a grade 12, I've made an impact in their family, I've made an impact in their immediate family, I've made impact in his or her family that he or she is going to have in the future. Because they're quite aware of how things are supposed to be done for someone to choose a particular career. So it's actually it's a cross-sectional, it's not individual, but everybody benefits. But it depends how you want to digest this information and apply it yourself. Because it's like going to lectures. Everybody, a lecturer will say anything or educate the learners, but it's all about who understands what the lecture is saying and who applies it and makes a difference out of that. So I would say it's cross-sectional. It's the learner, the parents, and the future. I think, that's what I think about what we do. And I'm actually quite sure that that's what we do, yeah.
Okay. So looking at the big picture then, I'm looking at the entire country. I know your research is quite specific. Would you say that you're researching to educate the policy writers as well? Because if the government is not pushing the same message as what you're trying to push, it won't work, surely, because you need that buy-in. Have you thought about, you know, influencing policy writers as well?
Yeah. So part of, like, it's my goal, personal goal. And actually that's what led me to do this PhD. I want to reach out to the education minister or the minister of education in South Africa. Maybe have coffee with one day. The two of us, we can engage, because policy writing is important. South Korea have started doing this. They've already implemented what they call a Career Development Act, which specializes in raising career education and awareness in young people. And a lot of countries are struggling to implement that, but that's where the problem is. So my goal already in my PhD, it's part of my variable, which is my independent variable, is policies in South Africa relating to career development. There's none as we speak, because they're not even implementing such to raise awareness or to give platforms to younger people to have access to career education. So I'm trying to raise that awareness. I'll say part of my PhD is social justice. I think that's the broader term that I can use for you to understand that policy making and the part of my PhD involves social justice. because a lot of poor people in South Africa, and where the scale goes down to or high to, I think it's mostly in poor communities. That's where the high employment rate is. Those that are affluent, there's always a way because they've got the money and exposure to get access of career counseling. But what about those who can't afford? Because to see a psychologist like 5,000 or 10,000 rand to just see a psychologist. So just imagine who can afford that.
Yeah.
So that's where the policy making and the government, like what you mentioned, comes into play.
Okay, so you've mentioned there that you'd love to go for coffee. So let's be spontaneous. Let's say we are having coffee and I'm the one who's writing the policies. What would you say to me to get my attention, to get me to rethink the way I've always done things? So I'm the policy writer. You can go.
That's a good question. I think the first thing is I'll ask that particular person to, or which is you in this case, to review the current career guidance policies. Do we have any? If we don't have, and I ask them, look at the career, the unemployment rate, and what age is the unemployment rate is targeting? It's from 15 to 35. That's youth, right? And what are they lacking? Are we lacking employment opportunities, which are jobs? Are we lacking interventions to help young people to find a way to create jobs? Do we have enough entrepreneurs? Because part of unemployment is that I can't be working for a boss. Is do I have the mindset to have my own joint, which is a business, for me to be sustainable? So those are the questions that I'll pose to you, Noma, if you are the Minister of Education, to just to think, okay, what do we have in place to there is a life orientation in South Africa as we speak, but is it doing the job that we think as educators, ministers of education, helping us to get that throughput or that smooth transition to higher education and the world of work? Then those questions will make them think, because as we speak, it's not getting them anywhere.
Okay. And, if you were to convince, because questions, they make you think, as you know, you've made me think, but do you have a tagline that you think would convince me if you were to speak to me? Because as we know, people who've been in power for such a long time, they've got their way of working, and it's quite difficult to change a bill or to rewrite a policy, as you know. You have to have something that's different or unique. So what's the tagline that would capture my little heart and make me think, do you know what, I'm going in there and I'm going to push so that we can get a bit of a change for the youth or learners?
Youth unemployment in South Africa is 75%. That's a tagline on its own. What are you doing about it?
That is food for thought.
What are you doing about it?
I guess the question is, what are they doing about it? I guess that's the question.
There's my what are you in this case, you are the minister.
Yes. What am I doing about it? Well, on Ph.D. hardtalk, having a discussion about it. So going back then to our learners, as we know, in regards to people, we've got self-perception theory. I'm sure you're aware of that. Self-esteem, and I've seen with your abstract self-awareness. So when we're looking at all these theories, we know that, they've been trialed, tested in different parts of the world, and we know that as an individual, there's so many challenges that we face internally as well as the external, which your abstract has already touched on. So looking at the cultural factors in, is it Western Cape, and looking at the challenges that these learners are facing, what's your take on there being a change? Because like I've touched on, we've always done it this way. Are the youth, in terms of learners, seeing that there's a problem and wanting a change? As you said, if it's just one, brilliant, but I want it to be 10, because I'm Noma. So I don't believe in one, I want multitudes. So what's your take in terms of the buy-in from the learners themselves and the way they view themselves and the current situ?
You see, if you come to the career psychology world, it's not about a specific individual. And if you look at the SCCT theory, which is the social cognitive career theory produced by Lind, choosing a career, I think you can also relate with me here, Norma. Where I am, I didn't make this decision by myself.
Okay.
There were a lot of variables that were involved for me to be where I am or where you are.
Were there
So
moderator variables?
remember this quote from the African village. Actually, it's the African proverb. It says it takes a village to raise a child. So we cannot rest this case on one person, which is the learner.
Mm-hmm.
We need to involve other parties. They have to come on board, whether it's policymakers like yourself in this case, whether it's teachers, whether it's schools, whether it's parents, whether it's career counselors like myself. We all have to play a big role to make this particular person become the person that he or she wants to be. So it doesn't rest on one person. Everyone needs to come on board. So for instance, we'll say, guys, on Saturdays, come to school. We're hosting a career workshop. Are you available? Some parents are reluctant about it, or some parents in their mind or in their churches, in their communities, they think a doctor makes a good living and they force their child to being a doctor. Maybe their child wants to be a carpenter or a plumber.
Okay.
You understand? So to some extent, we're stereotyping and stigmatizing certain careers not to be worth our worth as people, or not to be something that a family relates to. So there's so much education that needs to go into how we educate our kids as parents, as schools, as teachers, and other people who are also variables about how do we help this person to find what is it that I want and what is it that I want to be in the future.
I understand what you're saying, but my opinion is that you've gone to the top of the pyramid, which you've identified from your response just now. I think you should start with the parents. Because if you're saying on a Saturday, they'll say, do you know what, I've got church commitments, I've got this and that, but you should be a doctor. Shouldn't we be educating the parents first and saying, actually, when it comes to careers, there's this road, you can be a sparky, which is an electrician, you can be a plumber, deal, with the pipes, etc. The salary is this, but you can eventually start your own business. These are the projections in terms of how much money you can make, etc., and bring employment into the community, right? That's education. Do you think you should be starting there, or do you stand by, let's go straight to the grade 12s? They're the chosen group.
So it's quite broad. Couldn't cover everything on my PhD. That's one thing, right?
Okay.
Because I only have 5 chapters. If I had 100 chapters, surely I was going to aid everybody. But parents are part of my variables on my PhD. So there's what we call a triangle analysis of career choices. So the triangle works like this. There's a teacher or a parent. Actually, start with the parent at the top. Then there's a teacher at the other corner. Then there's a school at the other corner. Then in between, that's the learner, right? So the learner feeds from these three. Those are the most immediate, right? People that they feed from. So if the school is not exposing them from different career options, the learner is going to be blurred in terms, or narrow-minded in terms of career options. They will take what they see in their communities or what their father and the mother are doing. Then if you go again to the parent, if the parent is not giving them exposure, of meeting different people, talking about different careers, they're always going to stick to what their parents do. If a parent is a foreman, the child is going to be a foreman. If the parent is a doctor, child is going to be a doctor. Then there's a teacher. Teacher has influence because those people, they give you good grades, bad grades, they give you corrections, they speak this and that in class. They can also influence you to be a teacher, but you don't want to be a teacher, or other careers, and you don't want that. So that triangle plays a big role. And the person in between feeds from these people or these elements. And if these elements are feeding them the wrong things, they'll end up making the wrong decisions. If they're feeding them the good decisions, they'll end up making the right decision. So it's not a one person's decisions or when I was a learner or when you're a learner. It's everybody who plays that role. Even supervisors, if you go to a university, that's a teacher, plays a big role for you to study further, to do postdoc, or a professor, because their influence is so much impactful in your life or development to become a particular person in terms of your career.
I hear you, but I'm thinking of children who are being raised by their grandparents, for example, because their parents are deceased, right? Or parents who are not educated, right? And the only world that they've seen is what they see around the community, which you've touched on. So when you've got such a scenario, and then you've got teachers as well, due to poverty, they were told, if you become a teacher, you will get this pension, you will get this, so stay there, you're locked in. There's no risk, essentially, in terms of benefits. And then, in terms of certain schools, as we know in certain provinces as well, there isn't that much funding going in and books, etc. And we know there's load shedding, and, to get out there is quite difficult. So what of that group? Because I think they are vulnerable in every aspect. How do we educate that entire group?
I will tell you, part of my sample are coming from the group that you just described. And, it also questions a teacher, a principal, a school, a government, a municipality. Why do we have a specific school in this area? What are we trying to improve in this community? So as much as we can minimalize it or scale it down to a smaller scale, we also need to look at what are the people from the top thinking about their decision to make a school in this community. It's not about getting good grades, no. If they are thinking that way, because most of the people, they think about, we just want a good pass rate. But what is it that if they get good pass rate, what is the next step? So I feel there's need for education, for parents to be educated, not to go to class and write tests and exams, to be told the importance that they have in a particular person, especially a young person, a learner. And as well as the government needs to have a plan, which are policymakers. Why are we putting a school in this area? Is it just because we want to tick a box that there's a school, or we want to improve the economy, the status in the community? So those are the things that need to be asked, or questions that need to be asked, so that we get clarity. And when we get clarity, we know how to go about it to solve a particular problem. And the biggest problem in South Africa, I'll tell you, is not access to education. Is education, is what to do when I get education. That is the biggest problem. I went to a school from grade 1 or grade R to grade 12. But when I get my matric with what we call A levels, what do I do with them? That is the biggest question. So that's what we need to address. How do we go about it to make sure that these kids, they realize, listen, if you study further, not that everybody's going to study further. If you know what you want and study further, These are the results. There are jobs in South Africa, but the problem is, how do you go about it to look for them? What is it that you're doing to get a job? How do you market yourself? And by marketing yourself is understanding who you are and what you can give, or the value you can give to that particular NGO, organization, company, etc. That is what is lacking.